Now we continue in these lessons of sanctification, our lesson where Christendom is deceived. Now perhaps the greatest failure is to make the discrimination with which we're concerned is in relation to the difference between mysticism and spirituality. It is here that not only the world is mistaken, but Christendom is deceived. Now, when we speak of Cain and the way of Cain, we're accustomed to recall immediately his act of murder born of jealousy and malice. But there's another side to remember, and we must be fair to Cain or we miss the whole point. Cain did not exclude or ignore God. He acknowledged God, then he built an altar to God. Cain worshiped with his whole aesthetic sense, and Cain murdered his brother. Christendom is largely constituted by this sense. It's architecture, it's ritual, it's music, it's adornment, it's lighting or lack of lighting, it's tone, it's atmosphere, it's vestments, and so forth. But Cain did not get through to God, and neither did the Jews. All religions have this soulish feature in common, more or less. And it is there that the fatal blunder has been made by many religious people who contend that other religions, which are undoubtedly devout and sincere, should not be interfered with, but the good in them should be recognized and accepted. Now, simplicity may give God a chance, but it's not necessarily spiritual. How near to the truth in perception and interpretation can the mystical go? What a wonderful things can the imagination see, even in the Bible. What thrills of amazement, ecstasy, can be shot through an audience or congregation by a soul master. But it all may be a false world with no divine and eternal issues. What an artificial world we live in. And the tragedy in this melodrama is that it is real life to so many. The soul world is the devil's imitation. How Satan must laugh behind this mask. Oh, for reality, the reality of the eternal. Now, while a cultured soul with a keen sense of the beautiful and the sublime is immeasurably preferable to a sordid one, so far as the world is concerned, it's not necessarily a criterion that such has a personal, living knowledge of God as a person and has really been born again. The soul realm is a complex and dangerous one and can take people out of their depths, but then land them in moral, mental, and physical ruin with all hope gone. So we look here at the attributes of the Spirit. As the soul is a trinity of reason, affection, and volition, so is the Spirit a trinity. Its attributes are conscience, communion, and intuition. Now, when Adam sinned, he did so as a result of what seemed to be him to be a sound and right argument and reason and judgment of what was good and desirable. Now, the conscience which accused him and caused him to make an excuse could not restore him to God's favor, but forever kept God in his consciousness. Now, we're not saying that human conscience is infallible and always right. Most certainly it is not. We can have a sense of right and wrong which is altogether misinformed and false, and Satan then can play tricks with the conscience. We're only pointing out what conscience is as an attribute of the Spirit. Christ is God's perfect standard for conscience, and union with Christ is the only ground of life in the Spirit. Now, with the whole human spirit, conscience must be quickened from above. Now, the Spirit is the organ of spiritual knowledge, and spiritual knowledge is very different from natural or soul knowledge. Intuition is that faculty of spiritual intelligence by which all spiritual beings work. Angels serve the will of God by intuitive discernment. The only knowledge of God which is of spiritual value for ourselves or for others by our ministry is that we have by revelation of the Holy Spirit within our own spirit. Christianity is a revelation or it is nothing. The Apostle Paul makes it very clear that the secret of everything in his life and service was the fact that he received his gospel by revelation. The new birth brings with it new capacities of every kind, and among these the most vital is new and different faculty of divine knowledge, understanding, and apprehension. Now, the function, though, of the human intellect is to give to spiritual things intelligent form for ourselves and for others. Now, one other chief lesson that we have to learn, and which God takes great pains to teach us, is that spiritual ends demand spiritual means. How important is it that every fresh undertaking in work for God should come by revelation to those he chose for that work? It is very difficult, a crucifixion indeed, for the natural man to do nothing, have nothing, and especially to know nothing. The utter emptying of all self-resource is the only way to have all things of God. So, we see then that God's special concern is with the Spirit in the believer. His, that is God's quest, is for sons of the Spirit. There is a sonship by creation on the basis of law. But by the fall, the going astray, or deviating, all the divine purposes and possibilities of that relationship have broken down, and that relationship is no longer of value. So the Spirit begins operations in that realm of death and distance, convicting of sin against heaven. The spirit of man then, being the place of the new birth and the seat of this only true sonship, is also therefore the new man. So then those who by being born again have become little children, Matthew 18:3, are babes in spiritual things, 1 Corinthians 3:1. Now such have to learn a new kind of knowledge and to live a new kind of life, Romans 6:4. We have to learn that our life, our natural life, cannot do God's will, live as God requires, or do God's work. God has, however, always drawn a broad line between natural might and power on one hand and by spirit on the other. Zechariah 4:6. Now the newborn babe has to learn a new walk in the Spirit as different from nature. The nature of this walk is that reason, feeling, and natural choice are no longer the directive laws or criteria of the spiritual man. Now, the reason would dictate a certain course. The affections would urge in a certain direction. The will would seek to fulfill these judgments and desires. Now, to learn to walk in the Spirit is the life lesson of the new man as he is vindicated. We must remember the law of this walk, which is faith. Faith, apart from works, is dead. James 2:26. How true that is. But the works of faith are not those of the flesh. The things of the Spirit are foolishness to the flesh. Thus faith is the law of the walk of the new man. The things of the Spirit are foolish to the natural man. Now men seek the origin of Christianity among the philosophy of the first century church. Scholars contrasted still with these philosophies and schemes in those of latter growth. Has it never occurred to men how much more Christianity is than a philosophy? That it includes a science, a biology pure and simple. As well might the naturalists contrast zoology with chemistry, the living with the dead, as tried to explain the spiritual life in terms of the mind alone. It must be seen that the characteristics of the Christian religion is its life, and that a true theology must begin with a biology. Now, if this analogy can be worked out, we should expect answers to at least 3 questions. The answers, I believe, will help us in our faith to lay hold of this truth of sanctification or being conformed to the image of Christ. Now, the first question, what corresponds to the protoplasm in the spiritual sphere? Second, what is the life? And third, what do we know about the process and the plan? Now, in this lesson, we look particularly at what corresponds to the protoplasm. We would forsake the lines of nature were we to imagine for a moment that the new creature was made out of nothing. Nothing can be made out of nothing. Matter is uncreatable and indestructible. Nature and man can only form and transform. Hence, when a new animal is made, no new clay is made. Life merely enters in to already existing matter, assimilates more of the same sort, and rebuilds it. Now, the spiritual life works in the same way. He must have a peculiar kind of protoplasm, a basis of life, and that must be already existing. To bear the heavenly, we must also bear the earthly. Now, the spiritual life finds this in the materials of character with which the natural man is previously provided. Mind and character, the will, the affections, the moral nature. These form the basis of spiritual life. Now, to look in this direction for the basis of spiritual life is consistent with all analogy. The lowest mineral world mainly supplies the material. This is true for the insect species. The vegetable kingdom supplies the material for the animal. The natural man supplies then the material for the spiritual. Now, it's not necessary to go so far into the psychology either of the new creation or of the old to define more clearly what these moral bases are. It is the spirit of man. This is where it resides. It is enough to discover that in this womb the new creature is to be born, fashioned out of the mental and moral parts, substance or essence of the natural man. The only thing to be insisted upon is that in the natural man, this mental and moral substance or basis is spiritually dead. However active the intellectual or moral life may be, it is dead from the point of view of this other life. That which is flesh is flesh. It lacks the kind of life which constitutes the difference between the Christian and the non-Christian. It has not yet been born of the Spirit. Now, to show further that this protoplasm or spirit of man possesses the necessary properties of a normal protoplasm, it will be necessary to examine what these properties are. They're two in number. Number one, the capacity for life and plasticity, or the ability to be molded. Not enough to find an adequate supply of material. That material must be the right kind. All kinds of matter have not the power to be the vehicle of life. All kinds of matter are not even fitted to be the vehicle of electricity. What peculiarity there is in carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen when combined in a certain way to receive life, we cannot tell. We only know that this life is always associated in nature with this particular basis and never with any other. Now, we're not in the same darkness as regard to the spiritual life. When we look at the complex combination which we predicate as a basis for spiritual life, we do find something that gives it a peculiar qualification for being the protoplasm of the Christ life. We discover one strong reason at least, not only why this kind of life should be associated with this kind of protoplasm, but why it should never be associated with other kinds which seem to resemble it. Why? For instance, this spiritual life should not be engrafted upon the intelligence of a dog or the instinct of an ant. The protoplasm of spirit or spirit in man has something in addition to its instincts or habit. It has a capacity for God. In this capacity for God lives its receptivity. It is the very protoplasm that was necessary. The chamber is not only ready to receive the new life, but the guest is expected. And until he comes, he is missed. The spirit of man longs and yearns for God. This is not peculiar to the protoplasm of the Christian spirit. In every land and age, there's been altars to the unknown God. And the universal cry of the human soul is, I perish with hunger. This is a cry that fits it for Christ. Now, the other quality we're looking for in the spirit of man is the ability to be molded. Conformity demands conformability. This plasticity is not only a mark characteristic of all forms of life, but in a very special sense of the highest form. It increases steadily as you rise in the scale. Now, when we reach the soul and the spirit, this mobility is found in its most developed form. When we regard its susceptibility to impression, its lightning response even to influence, or its vast powers of growth, we're forced to recognize in this the most perfect capacity for change. The marvelous plasticity of the mind contains at once the possibility and prophecy of its transformation. The soul, in a word, was made to be converted. What is the life? Now, the main reason for giving the life, the agent of this change, a separate treatment, is to emphasize the distinction between it and the natural man on the one hand and the spiritual man on the other. The natural man is its basis, the spiritual man its product. The life itself is something different. Just as any organism, we have these three things: formative matter, form matter, and the forming principle of life. So in the soul, we have the old nature, the renewed nature, and the transforming life. No man has yet seen this life. It cannot be analyzed, weighed, or traced in its essential nature. But this is just what we expected. This invisibility is the same property we found to be peculiar in the natural life. We saw no life in the first embryo, in the oak, the palm, the bird, or in human. In the Christian, we shall not expect to see it, for we now move among the spiritual, which lies beyond the grossness of the natural eye. Now, we do not pretend that science can define this life to be Christ. It has no definition for its own life, much less for this life. But because the law of this walk is faith, and by faith we do understand, we know this life to be Christ. There are converging lines which point in this direction that it is the Christ. There was one of whom history acknowledges to have been the truth. One of his claims was this: I am the life. Now, according to the doctrine of biogenesis, life comes only from life. It was his additional claim that his function in the world was to give life to men. I'm come that you might have life, and that you might have it more abundantly. This could not refer to natural life, for men already had that kind of life. He that hath the Son hath another kind of life. Know ye not your own selves that Jesus Christ is in you? Now, all through history, there have been those whose characters assumed a strange resemblance to him, who was the life. Now, when we see the bird character appear in an organism, we assume that the bird life has been at work. Likewise, when we behold conformity to type in a Christian and know that the type can be produced by the type of life alone, then we know that the Christ life has been at work. If every effect demands a cause, what other cause is there for a Christian? This is the mark and nature of sanctification. And he who knows this will not be deceived by the imitation. Hallelujah.